Hello and welcome back to Good Nightmare. You may have noticed that I was gone for my first release day ever. This is just because I needed a little break for myself. I think that's important for everyone to take a little bit of time out for yourself whenever you feel like you desperately need it. But I am back and I am excited to bring you a very disturbing case today. Just as a quick content warning, this case does involve child death and child murder. As always, I will keep the details to a minimum because we are not trying to stress anyone out. The Bloody Benders were a family of 4 living in Labette County in Kansas. The area was populated mostly by Osage people, as well as Cherokee and many Euro-Americans. It was a reasonably small county, having been founded in a very loose sense in 1867. The Bender family consisted of John, his wife Elvira, and their son John Jr. and daughter Kate. At least this is the assumed family relations. There is a lot of folklore and mythology surrounding the Benders, so it's difficult to determine fact from fiction. It was rumoured that John Jr. and Kate were either brother and sister or a young married couple. In fact, there is no definitive documentation that any of the family were related. John Bender and John Jr. are recorded as having been born overseas, which links them in some way at least, likely in Germany or the Netherlands, and it's assumed that all of the Benders were related in some way. Elvira was believed to have been born Elmira Hill Mark, and to have married Simon Mark, with whom she claimed to have had 12 children. When this relationship ended, she apparently moved on to John Bender. I'm not entirely sure what happened to her rumoured 12 children, but they didn't come with her into her new family. It was suggested that Elvira had a penchant for murdering her husbands, though this was never proven and doesn't appear to come up in the case of the Bloody Benders. John Bender and his family were some of the first to settle in the newly established county, their land being adjacent to the Great Osage Trail. John Bender and John Jr. built a barn and a corral on their land, arriving at the property first. Elvira and Kate moved in once the new home was ready. The cabin was small, divided in two by a hanging canvas. The Benders lived in the back room, while the front was used as a general store. The general store also contained the living quarters and the kitchen where customers were able to visit, have a meal and rest for the night. Parents John and Elvira Bender were in their 60s and 50s respectively. Neither of the two spoke much English, apparently, but when they did, John was barely understandable. Elvira was known to have a very sharp tongue when she did speak. Her neighbours would call her a she-devil because of her harsh and sometimes cruel demeanour. John Jr. was an attractive 25-year-old man who spoke fluent English with a slight German accent. Many considered that he may be mentally disabled as he was prone to laughing to himself with seemingly no cause, though who's to know. His sister was 23. She was attractive, smart, and spoke English with almost no accent. She advertised herself as a psychic and a healer, handing around flyers promoting her abilities. The area was full of spiritualists who flocked to see her and her seances and lectures advocating for free love. She was a popular figure in the area. In May 1971, the corpse of a man named Jones was discovered in Drum Creek. He had had his skull crushed and his throat slit. The owner of Drum Creek was suspected initially, but nothing was done about the claim, and so there were never any charges laid. Almost a year later, in February 1872, 2 male corpses were discovered, both with crushed skulls and cut throats, in the same area. By 1873, there were reports of many missing people in the area, so much so that travellers actively avoided it. Men suspected of the murders were driven out of town, and while some were arrested, they were ultimately released. It was certainly an event that could no longer be ignored. As we now know, or can assume, the murders were being committed by the Bender family. The way the Benders killed their victims was the stuff of nightmares, which makes it quite fitting for this podcast. It was also the stuff of many a film, including Sweeney Todd and Australian horror The Loved Ones, which I highly recommend if you like a gritty B-movie horror. It's said that the Benders would invite their guests into their lodging, having them sit at the head of a table over a trap door leading to the cellar. Kate, the daughter, would distract the guest while John Sr. and John Jr. would approach them from behind and smash their skull with a hammer. Either Kate or Elvira would then slash the victim's neck to ensure their death. They would then drop the lifeless corpse through the trapdoor and would later head down to the cellar to strip the body of any valuables before burying them on the property. While some visitors had valuables, others were carrying very little, and so it's suspected that the Benders may have killed for thrill as much as for money. Not everyone who stayed at the Benders' home suffered the same fate, however. There were some who were wily, or perhaps just lucky, escapees who testified to the method of the murder described. One would-be victim, William Pickering, had refused to sit by the cloth dividing the home because it was filthy. It was stained with blood and who knows what else. He was threatened with a knife by Kate when he became a difficult customer, or victim rather, and so he fled. A Catholic priest reported that he left the premises after seeing one of the men concealing a large hammer. 2 more men had come to see Kate for her psychic abilities. They stayed for dinner but refused to sit near the cloth that disguised the trap door. Kate apparently became aggressive toward them, and when the Bender men appeared from behind the cloth, the would-be victims left. In all, there were many victims found in various states, though most sharing the same injuries: a crushed skull and a cut throat. Between the years of 1871 and 1873, the following victims were murdered and later discovered on the property. Mr. Jones, located in Drum Creek with a smashed skull and a slit throat. 2 unidentified men with the same injuries as Mr. Jones. Ben Brown from Kansas had been reported missing. He was found in the apple orchard. W.F. McCroddy was missing. Henry Mackenzie from Indiana, missing. Johnny Boyle of Kansas, found in the Bender's well. George Newton Longcore and daughter, buried together in the apple orchard. Dr. William York, found buried in the apple orchard. John Greery and 2 unidentified people, 1 male, 1 female, buried in the apple orchard. And possibly one of the worst, a selection of body parts suspected of belonging to 3 different victims buried on the property, as well as another 4 males, with skulls smashed and throats cut, in Drum Creek. It was the murder of George Newton Longcore and his daughter Mary Ann that led to the undoing of the Bloody Benders. They had left Kansas heading for Iowa but had not been seen or heard from in some time. In 1873, George's neighbour Dr. William Henry York went searching for the pair. He questioned people along the trail, and by March 9 he turned around to return home, but he would never arrive. His brothers, Colonel Ed York and Alexander M. York, of the Kansas State Senate, were aware of William's plans, and when he didn't return, they set up a search for him. A group of 50 or so men traced William's journey and spoke with many people along the trail who would have seen him. On March 28, 1873, Colonel York and Mr. Johnson of the search party arrived at the Benders' home and advised them that their brother had gone missing. They asked if the Benders had seen him. To throw York off their scent, the Benders claimed that William had likely run into trouble on the road. On April 3, after being informed that a woman had recently fled the Benders' home after being threatened with knives, York returned to their homestead to confront them. Elvira claimed not to be able to understand English when York accused them of the threat. However, when he insisted, she understood enough that she could respond that the woman was a witch who had cursed her coffee. York was convinced that the family was guilty, given the suspicion surrounding them. Townspeople's testimony that the town was a hotspot for disappearances and their own defensiveness. But he needed evidence. In spite of York's fixation on the Bender family, the townspeople had not yet narrowed down on who they believed the killers to be, just that they knew Osage County was a dangerous area. While a warrant was sought to search all homes between Big Hill Creek and Drum Creek, the Benders were able to escape the town. Billy Toll noticed that the Bender home was abandoned 3 days after the town meeting, when he drove by and saw that the animals on the property were unfed. He reported the abandonment. However, due to poor weather, a few days passed before access could be gained to search the place. Several hundred people were called upon to form a search party to locate the Benders. It was during this search that a horrible smell was noticed coming from the cellar of the Bender home. It was wafting through the now nailed shut trapdoor. The trapdoor was wrenched open to reveal the pit where congealed blood was coating a broken stone floor. No bodies were found in the cellar. Later in the evening, the party began to search the property more thoroughly, looking in particular at the garden and the orchard where they would find Dr. York's body. By midnight, another 9 possible grave sites were marked. The following morning, they continued digging, finding another 8 bodies in 7 graves. And another body was found in the well, along with several mismatched body parts. All bodies but one, the child, who appeared untouched, had had their skulls bashed in and their throats cut. It was speculated the child had been strangled or buried alive. The town was absolutely incensed by the crimes. A friend of the Benders, Brockman, was reported to have been hung from a beam in the home until he was unconscious, before being revived and questioned over and over again, until the 3rd time when he was allowed to make his way home. Along with the outrage came fascination. Around 3,000 people came from all over to visit the site and scavenge souvenirs, including bricks that lined the bloody cellar. As the family was still on the run, a reward of $1,000 was offered. This would be worth $21,000 in 2019. And later, a reward of $2,000 was instated if all 4 murderers were apprehended. The Benders had escaped in a wagon led by their horses, which they ended up abandoning by the side of the road not far from their home. They bought tickets for the train and intended to head for Humboldt before John Jr. and Kate would change tracks and head for the border of Texas and New Mexico. This was a dangerous area, full of outlaws. The pair were left unpursued as officers who had travelled to the area rarely came back alive. Elvira and John Sr. headed for Missouri. Rumours circled and have been circling ever since about the fate of the Bloody Benders. Some say that John Sr. completed suicide or went on to commit further murders. Some say that Kate was burned alive for her crimes. Others that they simply disappeared or died of illness or complications from old age. The reward for their arrest was never claimed. Items taken from the Benders' home were displayed at museums along with a skull that was claimed to belong to John Sr. The skull was later lost when the museum holding it was shut down. Of course, there's no solid evidence to confirm the skull ever did belong to John, and though with today's technology it may have been possible to try to determine ownership, on this podcast we all know how often evidence, including body parts, bones, internal organs, documents, or anything of the like, can go missing, and how this can directly lead to a case's one chance at being solved being lost forever in time. If you have your own theories about the Bloody Benders, I and my listeners would love to hear them. Be sure to join the Facebook group, which you can find by searching Good Nightmare Pod, and I'll link it in the show notes. You can catch me on Twitter at goodnightmare_s and Instagram at the same handle. If you want to contact me directly, the best way to reach me is via email at goodnightmare_s@outlook.com. Thank you so much for listening and sticking with me on my short break. Until next time, sweet dreams.
Hello everyone, this is Kate Karen. You might know me as the co-host of the Forgotten News podcast. And yes, I am whispering, but I am not whispering because I'm hiding from someone or on the run. The reason why I am whispering is because I want to tell you a secret. Only a few people know so far, and this is the secret. I am the host of a new podcast which will tell stories of true crime, weird disappearances, strange mysteries, wild adventures, spooky things, funny things, and also stories that listeners ask me to tell. But these stories will be spoken entirely in whisper, and every story will be 100% true. In fact, the podcast is called Whispered True Stories. For many people, hearing a story that is told in whisper makes it much more interesting to hear, and listening to a whispered mystery or a true crime story at night has often been found to be relaxing or even comforting for people who have difficulty in falling asleep. Now, I will mention one last thing. Over the past several months, as the co-host of a podcast, I have received many comments from listeners about my voice and how soothing it is when they listen to me tell a story. So, I'm hopeful that the combination of whisper and my voice will give you as much pleasure as all of those very sweet comments have given to me. Be sure to remember the name of the show, Whispered True Stories. Look for it on iTunes and hopefully